Okay, well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to our first web tips of the 2015 year. I hope everyone had a great holiday, great New Year's, Christmas, anything else in between. And welcome back to the new edition of the web tips for 2015 here. So our first month is going to be talking about transaction, querying the desktop products, and then every other month we'll be doing workflow web tips as well. So on the odd months it's desktop products, and on the even months it's the workflow products. And every now and then we'll merge the two together to make sure everyone's aware about how the desktop products, forms, and transaction can work together in that environment. So before we get started here today, let's just go over a few housekeeping bits. So right now everyone is on mute. We don't have a large audience today, so we might open up the microphones to have some more interaction to allow the questions to come through instead of just on the typing through the GoToWebinar. But at any time, if you do have questions, please type them in during the chat, and we can get to them at the next available moment. So for the most part, I will keep it on mute so we can get through, and then I'll open up for questions to the team, and we can just use the microphones if that works out. So as everyone is aware, we just talked about what web tips is, or how often we're having. So what are web tips in general? So web tips is our offering to our Solution Care customers, which everyone on the phone today is a Solution Care customer. So we offer this as free tips and tricks for this hour, in addition to the opportunity you have to use your Solution Care for questions and other support issues. So these are things that we're working on that we see our customers might be improving upon, or features that might be useful to you out there as you do your day-to-day work. So that's what the basis of web tips is, just sharing our best practices and things that we're learning along the way. So I'm Lance Yoder, working for Clear Process now for a little over a year. I've been using SAP for about 7 or 8 years, and I'm focusing on data migration and master data management. Been using WINSHUTTLE products for about 4 or 5 years now, and along with one of the other folks on the phone, was awarded a Golden Brushie, my little nerd Emmy, for WINSHUTTLE Innovation Award there. So just being recognized for our use of the WINSHUTTLE tool. All right, so what are we going to be looking at today? Today we're going to look at 3 things individually, but we're going to focus on using transaction and cell-based mapping. So most people are familiar with the row-based mapping, where you just implement rows and rows and rows of data, use WINSHUTTLE to shove it into SAP through a T-code, and everything works just fine. It's great use of the tool for master data maintenance, mass updating of all kinds of records, and mass creation as well. But today we're going to look at cell-based mapping, something I don't see a lot of people using, but is very handy, especially for those people that need to have some kind of form-based, even though if it's an Excel very basic form, not as useful, as intelligent as a WINSHUTTLE workflow form, but still has its purpose with an Excel-based form. So we're going to be focusing our efforts on looking at those Excel-based forms today, and some of the features that can be used around that. So let's take a look at the first one. So the first one, again, is about cell-based mapping. So let's take a look at a form that looks much like a form. It's not rows and rows of data like you're used to seeing with WINSHUTTLE transaction. This is more of a form. You have a header, you have some detail information, and things that can be filled out along the way, drop-downs that you can use. You can list your sales orgs, you can list your plants, all those types of things. So many people don't realize that you can use Excel to do this kind of what I'll call mini form. There's no workflow behind it by any means, but we have a little form that someone can fill out and email to the master data team, for example, that can be used then to upload into SAP on a one-off basis. So let's take a look at the script that goes along with this. So let me go ahead and open that up. We have it. First one is called Create Basic Data. All right, so let's take a look at the mapping section just to understand how do we use cell-based mapping with transaction as opposed to row-based mapping. So up at the top of your screen, you have this little paper icon. You're probably used to saying column-based mapping. I'm not going to switch it here because I don't want to mess up my solution, but you're probably used to saying column-based. That's where you say, okay, everything in column A, that's the material. Column B is the plant. Column C is the reorder point. And each row is its own record, maybe have some loops in there, but it's going row by row and implementing those data changes in SAP. Well, when you're using cell-based mapping, you only can do one record at a time. It's more of a form that you're used to filling out. If you're at the doctor's office or you're filling out a material master request, you have just a form that you're filling out. You're not filling out multiple requests at a time. In this case, it's only one because you're not using row-based or one at a time on each row. So what is the difference? So you do your recording the exact same way. If you're going to do a bill of material change or create a cost center, you record your transaction in the exact same way. The difference is when you select cell-based mapping and you map something up to the mapping area. I'm going to change my filters here so we can hide all the disabled stuff. You can see that the items I'm bringing in from Excel, they're not just a column. They have a column and a row. So E31 is where I'm getting material description from, or D33 is where I'm getting the material group from. So you're using specific cells on the Excel form instead of a column. Because we're only processing one at a time, we can use a specific cell. So that's the main difference in using cell-based mapping versus column-based mapping. So let's take a look at how you can manipulate a form to be more useful in this kind of environment. So most people don't always know, most users out there don't always know the codes for everything. They know the descriptions for something. So they don't, if you have 50 plants in your organization, they may not know that plant 1254 is Twinsburg or something like that. They just know that Twinsburg has a plant. So when you're using these drop downs, you want to be maybe a little bit more descriptive. It's like plant 1000 dash plant A, so we have a description here. 2000 is plant B, to allow the user to select based upon a description and not have to know the code. So that's an upside. So you can do something like that to provide the user the ability to select via a description instead of a code. Okay, but the downside of that is when you're mapping into SAP from Excel with WinShuttle, you're aware that the data that is in that cell is what gets loaded into SAP. So for plant, the plant code is 1000. It's not 1000-plant A. That's not a valid SAP code. So we need to extract that information out of the dropdown and put it in a column. So you can see over here, I have 1000 in each, and these are formulas that are extracting that. So when you're making your dropdowns in these cell-based forms, you want to make sure that generally I put the SAP code at the very beginning, so it's very consistent. But I always know that when they select something, that the left 4 characters are the plant, or the left 3 characters are the MRP controller, and so on. Now you can put it wherever you want. Maybe it's the last 3 characters at the end of your description, but something that you can use an Excel formula to get. If you put it in the middle, it's not going to be in the same place every time. Character-wise, you might have to do a little more advanced functions with Excel to extract that. But I generally recommend putting it at the very beginning or the end so the users can see it on there, but also have the description. So that's what we've done here. We provide this code. Now this is the value that gets mapped into SAP instead of this whole number. So you can do that all throughout the process. Now we'll be taking a look at a creation of a material, the extension of a material to a plant and sales org using this method, as well as updating the alternate units of measure. So we have multiple units of measure, so we might have to do some looping, or maybe there's some other options that we need to do here. But this is basically your standard material master. You have sales org data, material data for MRP, and so on. So let's just go ahead and run this. Up here at the top, I'm going to put in my part number. So it's tips 3. I ran it a couple times this morning to make sure that it works, and we had some luck. So I'm going to go ahead and save that file, go to my transaction script, and make sure everything is set up. Got create material master from form, that's the right file, and the request form. So the log cell, you have to be specific about where you want the log cell to be. So unlike column-based mapping, you just pick a column and in every row and put the log, you have to pick a cell here as well. So I'm picking cell W2 for the result of this transaction. So I'm going to go ahead and just run this, and then we'll take a look at the result in SAP. So with any luck, we should see that one record was successful. That was relatively quick, so let's take a look at the results. Okay, so I have some old data in there, but you can see in row W2 or cell W2 here, it says material tips 3 was created. So if we take a look at that material in SAP, let me bring up that. All right, here we go. You can see that I've created just the basic data views, and then some other views come along with it after I saved. But I've entered some information, my base unit of measure, my material group. All of these things came right from the form. So you can see material group is 00706. That's in there. Description, I just have English for my description, and all the other information that comes along with it. So by using cell-based mapping, you can successfully use what I would call a mini form or an Excel form to do one-off records to help your day-to-day business, because everything doesn't come to you that needs mass updating. You create vendors one at a time. You create cost centers one at a time. And using these little Excel files are a great way to do that until you can create a WINSHUTTLE form and workflow that's more robust about routing web-based things around and connecting right to SAP. So this is a good interim solution. If you don't have the workflow tools, this is a good way to at least start out with something that's a little bit useful. All right, so we took a look at that cell-based mapping. We can see here that we have alternate units of measure as well. So we didn't really load those. But before we go into that, I wanted to just open up the mics here to see if anyone has any questions about what can be done with cell-based mapping. So if you have a question, I've unmuted your mics. Go ahead and feel free to ask. Okay, it doesn't look like anything right now, so we will go ahead and continue on. Feel free to raise your hand on the GoToWebinar if you have a question, and then we'll just open up the mics and go from there. All right, so let's see. That was the beginning of cell-based mapping. Let's take a look at our agenda here to see what else we have. All right, so using alternate units of measure. So alternate units of measure are one of the trickier things that SAP has in stock for us here as WINSHUTTLE users. So if we go into the Material Master and look at updating alternate units of measure, go additional data, units of measure. The issue that we have with this screen is that there's no way for WINSHUTTLE to add a new record or search for a new record. We can see that the data grid here is blank, but if I had many records in there, I don't necessarily know which one is blank. I can include some if conditions in my transaction if I'm not using GUI scripting. So if you don't have GUI scripting involved, this is an option for you for maintaining or creating alternate units of measure. But if you don't have GUI scripting and you just came in here with your normal transaction, you would have to create a lot of if conditions to check each one of these rows to see if they had a value, and if not, that's the row that you would put that information into. So that works. We have 12 rows here. So if you have more than 12 alternate units of measure, then this is where you have a problem, because there are no buttons on the bottom to add a new record. You see a button to delete a line, but there's nothing to insert new record like you might have in a sales order or purchase order transaction. They have the plus sign or the insert new row, something of that nature to help automate that process to insert a new blank line into the data grid. Here we don't have that. So the standard answer is, well, you need GUI scripting in order to do this. Well, we find that many people that are managing the materials at this level tend to be the master data team, a core set of people that have elevated access, specifically MM17. So the next example that we're going to go through is using MM17 to update alternate units of measure. So MM17, as many of you are aware, is the T code to mass update material masters and some other material-related objects. So why would we use WINSHUTTLE, which is a mass updating tool in its own right, against the mass updating T code? Well, MM17 is very good at updating many things to a particular value. So if you had 100 materials that you wanted to load a unit of measure, an alternate unit of measure from case to pieces, by all means, MM17, without WINSHUTTLE, you just go right into MM17 and that would work just fine. But if you have many materials with many different units of measure, then MM17 isn't so useful just right out of the box, because now you're doing multiple mass updates, one for each alternate unit of measure, maybe one for each material. So instead of doing one MM17, you're doing 10, 15, or 20 based upon your data set that you're using. So this example will walk through how to use WINSHUTTLE against MM17 to still do those one records at a time, do alternate units of measure one record at a time. So if we look at our form here, we have the opportunity to enter multiple units of measure. And there's actually another area here to enter multiple units of measure in a separate section. So what I've done in this form is I've created a little macro that will extract anything that has a valid value and put it over into another tab called alternate units of measure. So you can see my last material tips 2 from my test. We'll go ahead and hit our button here, prepare units of measure. Okay, you saw some blinking there. That was updating that tab. So now you can see the new units of measure. I'm going to delete that because we're not entering a UPC code today, but the material number that we're working with and all the valid units of measure. So if I was going to do this, let's say I had many units of measure and I was going to do MM17, I might have to do this one for each time, or in this case I might be doing manual MMO2s. So let's take a look at the step-by-step option with MM17. All right, so let me go ahead and open that script up, and we'll take a look at that. Let me take a quick peek to see if there are any questions. It looks like we're good so far. All right, so I've opened up my MM17 script, and I should be pointed to the right file, have my alternate units of measure tab, and let's go ahead and run step by step so we can see how this is working. So that's all set up. Let's take one step back, actually, and take a look at MM17 first. So when you're going to use MM17 to update things like alternate units of measure, and there are a couple other use cases for which you might want to use MM17 if you don't have GUI scripting. If you have GUI scripting, then this method doesn't necessarily come into play because you would just use your standard T codes. But up here in the variant section, you can create a variant. So if I wanted to update the units of measure section, and I'm going to put in a material, let's say tips 1, and nope, I don't want to change, I want to create. So we'll put in tips 1, and we'll say alternate unit of measure of piece. I don't think I have that one in there yet. And in the alternate unit of measure section, there are a lot of fields that we can bring in. So we can bring in as many fields as we want. We have the denominator, the numerator, for whatever reason. They call it counter in this screen, but it's the numerator of the conversion. You can put in length, height, volume, and so on. And if you're always going to use those fields in that mass update, you can save this as a variant. So in this particular T code, or the script, that's what I've done. So prior to creating my recording, I went into MM17 and created a variant of all the fields and the correct layout that I want them in. So if this was my proper layout, I could hit save, and this would save this as a variant. So under go-to, we could say save as variant, because save would actually make the change. So I want to do save as variant, and it'll give you the option to give it a name, mass update, MM alt units of measure, something of that nature. And that would save that as a variant to the MM17 feature. So let's go back to the beginning, and since I've already saved the variant, let's bring that one up. Okay, I've called it alt UOM, create alternate units of measure. So let's take a look at that. I'll put in that same material and that same item, and you can see that I have all of my columns that I need. I have the denominator, the numerator, gross weight, weight unit, volume, volume unit, all the stuff that I see in my Excel sheet. So now I don't have to worry about adding columns, because in MM17, when you want to update a column, you have to select the columns that you want to update, do you want to create. So using the variant, you can set all that up in advance. So now when you're recording, you're just recording yourself entering this variant into the screen and then executing, and all the fields will fall into place. So now that we're set there and have that background, let's go ahead and continue on with our step-by-step run. All right, just waiting for SAP to come up here. There we are. All right, so you can see I know my variant name was entered right into that box. And then we're going to continue on. Here's our material and the alternate unit of measure that we want to load. Notice I'm in the create and I have the change option marked off, so we're not going to be doing a change. And now, because my fields are already set, I'm mapping in those particular values right into my screen here, because I know what columns they're going to be in because I preset them using my variants. And then it's going to hit the Save button. So using MM17, you have the ability to do alternate units of measure updates without GUI scripting. So after it's saved, this is the screen that you get, the little execution. Now, unfortunately, the downside of doing this, you don't get the actual message that it was successful. But this little green button here has a value. So all of these little lights, so you have the red, this would be red if there's an error, the yellow triangle if it was a warning, and the green square if it was okay. So here we have the green square. And using the method of recording that dead, you can download data from SAP one transaction at a time. So you can't use transaction to mass download table data, out of Mara or Mark, but you can download information from the records you're processing on the screen. So let's take a look at that. So this is the record that we processed. You can see the result is in a different color. So when you're mapping from WinShuttle, when you're using the mapping from SAP to Excel, the mapping column is a little bit purple, a shade of purple, while the upload columns out of the box are blue. So this indicates that these are upload columns and this is a download column, and of course I have my log column. So I can see that the result is a 1, and that means that I got that green message. So if I would go in and do this again, I would get a different message. So now I'm going to run this process using the run now method. So that one unit of measure already exists. So maybe we'll get an error on that. That would be good so we can see the difference between success and failure. So it should be running here. One out of 2. Okay, so that's very good. So let's take a look at what the message was. All right, so we had no result. So something else went wrong there. In this case, again, we're not getting the exact message that we're looking for. But, after review, it would say that that material already has that unit of measure. So let's take a look at the material now to see the unit of measure update. Okay, so you can see the units of measure were uploaded. So for pallets, I had a 40 pallets equals 1 case. I just made up those numbers. That's probably not very realistic. And I have 1 each equals 25 cases. So maybe I want to flip those around the next time around to make it more realistic. But in the end, that's what those messages mean. So this is capturing that little light along the way. If I would put in an invalid unit of measure, I would probably get something a little different. So let's try to put in an invalid unit of measure and see what happens. So we'll just put X, Y, Z, save, and then we'll run on row 3 only. Okay, make sure I'm not in change mode here. Okay, 0 of 1 transaction. So let's take a look here. Okay, so it didn't capture any message. So since the indicator was not a 1, we know that it failed. And again, the downside is it doesn't capture any message because it's only getting that little green dot or the little red dot at the end. So the good news is that you can do that. So that's what this exercise is about, updating alternate units of measure. You could do the same with changing units of measure too. Here we did create, but you could also do a change. So I'll pause here to see if there are any questions on using MM17 with WinShuttle. I know it's an odd use case to use a mass updating tool against the mass updating T code, but this is one space where it comes into play. All right, so looking at the webinar, if you have a question, go ahead and just select raise your hand icon. We'll wait a minute, and then we can unmute your mic if you do have a question. Okay, so it doesn't look like we have any questions so far, and we'll continue on to our next demonstration. All right, so transaction using cell-based mapping with loops. So again, we're going to stick with the cell-based mapping philosophy here to understand some of the features that a cell-based mapping provides. So let's take a look at what we have with regards to that. Oh, I already have that file open. Okay, so this is another form. So again, we're dealing with one record at a time here, but in this case we have loops. So when you're dealing with material masters, you don't necessarily have loops, but when you're dealing with bills of materials, you have your header section, and then you have your detail section. So the header being what material, what plant, your alternate BOM if you have one, any other details at the header level, and then you have your line item levels as well. So much like column-based mapping, you can still do loops within cell-based mapping. We just have to be a little bit particular about how you set that up. So now that we see on the screen here how we're visually seeing it, let's look at the mapping to take a peek at how we would update that mapping. So let me go ahead and open that script. CSO1 create BOM. All right, looked like that opened relatively quickly. So here we have cell-based mapping and column-based mapping, and cell-based mapping is the one selected. So let's hide. I think everything is already filtered to hide disabled fields. We are disabled. Okay, so looking at this form, we see some Excel items being mapped in. Okay, Excel to SAP F3. So again, when you're doing cell-based mapping, you're going to see a cell name, so a column and a row. So column F, row 3, column F, row 4, and so on. But inside the loop, now we have the loop icon. So this is all the header information, the material, the plant, the BOM usage, change number, and so on. But now that we're going to get into the line item detail, we have to loop through that. So here's my loop icon. So we're going to loop through all the line item details. Now if we look at the mapping, we see that the mapping is done by column only. Okay, so when you drag your mapping in there, WinShuttle is going to default to the cell-based mapping because that's what is selected. So when I mapped in column B, wherever I selected B9 or B10 here, it said B10. So I had to change it. When I made it a loop, I had to change it back to just the column B because my materials, every row for materials are going to be in column B. And for each row of my looping, the item category is going to be in column D and so on. So now we have a combination of cell-based mapping and column-based mapping. So at the header level or anything outside the loop, you want to make sure that you have a column and row indicator, but inside the loop, just be certain that your cell mapping is based upon a column. So if you didn't have the loop in there, so if you put the loop in after you've done your mapping, when you started to do your mapping, you would get the cell-based, the B6, and so on. So after you add the loop, you would have to go back in and remove the column. If you put in the loop and then did your mapping, WinShuttle will recognize that you're inside a loop and just do the column-based mapping within the loop as required. Okay, so let's look at the Excel file here. Very similar to what I've done in the other Excel file. We have, in this case, we have some information here. Again, the item category is just a list of stuff. So we have L with the description of item, and then we have a few others. So again, we need to make sure we're extracting that value. So the item category that SAP wants is that just that single character, the L, the N, or the T. So we need to make sure we can extract that. So one thing I didn't show you on the Material Master one is that you can hide that column. So if I would go back to the Material Master one and hide those columns where the formulas are, we could lock this form down so users can't insert any information. That's very important in any WinShuttle run, whether you're using column-based or cell-based, is to validate that your file meets the requirements for that script, and locking down the form at some level to disallow inserting of columns, things like that, on these particular forms is useful to make sure that the columns are all consistent and in the right spot. Now here we have not done that locking, but just a recommended action to make sure users aren't able to go in there and delete something. All right, so I have my file set up, and one thing I have here is I have this load, this little load square. So in a previous tip, I said, how do we manage making sure that data doesn't get loaded to SAP before it's been validated? So in this case, we have some validation routines in a macro. So we have a button with tied to a macro, and in the background, that macro does some validation. It creates line numbers, puts the D's in the right place. So the D is the indicator that these are detail rows for that loop. Now this is the same as you would be doing if you're doing column-based mapping. You'd have to have a column identifier for which rows contain the detail information to continue looping through. So because I don't know where the user is going to end, they could be all the way down here. I don't want them to have to fill in the D, and I don't want to have a whole bunch of formulas in here managing if this is blank, if they delete a row, then I have all sorts of problems. So I tend to do all that stuff in a macro. So if they delete rows or something like that, you don't get the old pound ref Excel error because you deleted a function and everything else is sort of messed up because of that deleted row. So what I've done is I've created this load box. And if I look at the script in my mapping, you see that there's this if condition around the entire script. So this if condition is around the entire script. Let's take a look at that if condition. So it says if cell N3 is not blank, then go ahead and run it. So that means if it is blank, it's going to skip over the entire thing. So if this load column is blank, when I go to run this, it's not going to load anything. So I'm using this load indicator to catch any records from being loaded that haven't been validated. So I'm going to go ahead and hit this validate button here. And then you can see that it changed to, did all the validation. Now this is just some minor validation. It's not anything fancy, but just noticing that I'm able to increase the item, the row number or the item number, and then the details. So if I was to delete this information here, if I wanted to delete this information because I don't know if all that's going to work. Notice as soon as I made a change, my cell became red, and I can revalidate, and then it strips all that away. And again, you could hide those if you wanted to do that. But that's a unique way to make sure that you're not loading any unvalidated data through these forms. Have a validate button and put an if condition around your entire script to make sure that if it doesn't have that, it's not going to get loaded. They might try to process it, but WinShuttle isn't going to execute it. So let's go ahead and run this script, and we will see if it works. Okay, again, you have to have a log cell, so we're going to do cell K8. All right, looks like it's all right. Looks like it had problems writing back to this. Let me unmerge that cell. Let's try it again. All right, so it failed to load on that particular one, so let's take a look here why it did that. It says alternative 12 already exists. My problem was that I was trying to put the log cell in a cell that was merged, so I had to unmerge it. And then my transaction the first time was actually successful, so I tried to rerun it again, and it was already there. So what I want to show you now is that option when I run this without it being validated, how that's going to work out. So notice I don't have that X in the red box up there, and then we'll run this again. And instead of 0 out of 1, since it failed the last time through, I should see that it is processing 0 records. Not just 0 out of 1, but hopefully just 0. Okay, it ran 0 transactions. So as expected, because this did not have the X in there, it did not try to load that. So again, if I select that button, everything is set to go, and this time it should go on through and complete. All right, so it successfully completed one transaction there. And let's go ahead and take a look at that bill of material. All right, so you can see I've done this a few times as I've been preparing for this demonstration. So we've done 12 and 13 today, so let's take a look at number 12 or number 13 here. And you can see the components that I've loaded do indeed match up with the components on my screen. So this is a combination. So we have quantities are all lined up. The item numbers are appropriate, and then we have 9, 10. So everything is there. And if we look at the header, what's at the top, we have batch size of 1,000, we have 1,000, and we have all the information up there. So this was an example of how you can use cell-based mapping, so you can process an Excel-based form using WinShuttle and cell-based mapping, and then also including loops. So those were the 3 things that we wanted to talk about today, just overall using cell-based mapping, talking about using the T-code MM17 with the WinShuttle transaction in order to do alternate unit of measure updates or creations, and just briefly talked about creating a variant when you use MM17. That's a big piece of that to be successful. Make sure you go into SAP and the MM17 T-code and save your setup as a variant so you can just call in that, and then all your columns will be set up appropriately. And then we also talked about using loops within the cell-based mapping as well. Just a reminder, I glossed over briefly, but you can hide cells because in all those demonstrations we extracted information out of drop-downs. You can hide those columns as well in order to do that. So that's going to wrap up our demonstrations for today. One last shot here for questions. I'll give a moment if anyone has a question about what we reviewed today. All right, so let's continue on here. So we have some new Solution Care customers on the line with us today, and this is being recorded for some other folks that might be interested. So I just want to touch upon how Solution Care works. So the folks on the phone are already Solution Care customers, and these are the benefits that you're getting from that Solution Care. So with your normal WinShuttle maintenance, you get a couple of items that WinShuttle provides, as with any standard maintenance agreement. Bug fix issues, production upgrades or software upgrades and planning, new feature updates and feature requests. But along with that, Solution Care offered by Clear Process provides more umbrella support around doing forms and workflows, scripting, SharePoint support, just general Q&A, and we're there to help you if you get more work than your team can handle and so on. So Solution Care is really an umbrella support across the WinShuttle and SharePoint platforms. So just a little bit more information on that. And as we get to our last slide here, we are planning our next Lean Utopia event. So I think some of you were participating in our 2014 event that was held at the Moen campus. We're planning at least one for 2015, maybe more, I don't know, depending on the regions that we're able to meet with. And the next WebTips is going to be on forms and workflow. And that should be February 19th. So that's a typo on my part. That should be February 19th, of next month. And then we also have process templates available. And process templates are a quick and easy way to get some very common processes like purchase order requests, and we're coming up with material master request process as well. These are prepackaged that can be customized, the last bit. So maybe 80% done, and then the last bit can be customized to your needs. So prepackaged forms and workflow solutions for that. All right, so that wraps up our session for today. I hope you were able to get some good nuggets of information that you can apply to your daily life as you use WinShuttle. And if there are no other questions, all right, thanks everyone, and have a great day.